Well, we've just got back from Burke, where we've been promoting my little book, Burke and Beyond. And up there, we were talking to lots and lots of tourists and friends. And we met Peter and Mary from Melbourne. And in the course of conversation, Peter comes out with a Flying Doctor story. And not only that, but he grew up in Alice Springs and his dad was involved with the Flying Doctor service. And I thought, Peter, we've got to get this story down. He was a little bit, not sure, but we managed to. We've given him a good meal and he's feeling better about it. So, so welcome, Peter, and thank you very much for taking the time. And Mary, we appreciate it. But it's about this man, John Flynn, who's had such a big impact on Australia, certainly on my life, from when I was a boy. So I love stories about John Flynn. So, Peter, tell us a little bit about your young years, because you were only there for a short time yourself, but your dad was quite involved.
Correct. I was born in Alice Springs in January 1954. Mm-hmm. My father flew in the war. He flew Liberator bombers. And prior to the war, he was a bank teller. And when he came back, he went to the bank and found it was pretty unsatisfying. And he rejected offers from Qantas and ANA to be an airline pilot with them, principally because his eldest brother was killed during the war, and he felt it was unfair on his mother that he became a full-time pilot. So he asked an advertisement from Connellan Airways in Alice Springs in 1950, which I think said that it was a great opportunity for someone to become involved in managing a business. And he went up there, and they weren't aware that he was a pilot, but they found there was a shortage of pilots, so he became a very busy pilot for Connellan Airways. Connellan Airways had the license for the Flying Doctor service, and he, in his time in Alice Springs, did over 100 medical evacuations. And we were in Alice Springs until 1961.
Wow.
And he was a fairly big, name in Alice Springs during that time, and ended up being manager of Connellan Airways. When he started there in 1950, they had 4 planes made of plywood and cloth, and a staff of 25, and when he finished, they were 65 people. So it was quite a large enterprise by then.
Peter, it's probably a forgotten thing that Australia and pilots from the First World War, as well as from the Second World War, played a very significant part, not only just in aviation in Australia, but in the world. Like they were doing things that weren't done before, and particularly in a continent the size of Australia. So what John Flynn and his team gave to Australia was prodigious, really, wasn't it?
Quite correct. Quite correct.
Amazing.
In addition to the Royal Flying Doctor Service, they were doing mail runs, and he would be away for 6 days at a time, and he would probably stop 35 times in that time.
A mail run?
Doing a mail run and picking up people where they required assistance, what have you. So
try to tell any average postman that it was going to take him 6 days.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, very busy, fascinating. I have his logbooks, and it has the records of the people that he picked up on the medical missions.
So you talk about any particular adventures?
Look, I can't remember them to be honest, but certainly there were always incidents where stockmen were kicked by horses in the head, and I always thought the Flying Doctor Service would have a doctor on board the plane. That was never often the case. That it was he that would have to sort of sedate someone and put them in a stretcher and bring them back. I think
it
in later times. I just didn't have them there. I think, but I think it changed over the years. But so he did.
He had to be pretty innovative, because I should imagine some of the landing strips were pretty ordinary too, were they?
They were very ordinary, all dirt. And as I say, they were flying pretty flimsy planes back in those times.
But it's hard to believe. I was looking at a little piece of video today. I took a group of schoolboys about 15 years ago up to Darwin, and taking these kids from the coast and across that vast inland was a bit of a shock to them, because they'd never seen anything quite like it. And I think for them to begin to understand the size of what John Flynn achieved, given he was driving around an old Dodge car and all those sort of things, and those aeroplanes were pretty marginal. They were pretty, like you said, canvas and string, and the pilot said to be pretty brave, really.
Yes, he was written up at one stage, I recall. I've seen the clipping. He had to land his plane on the Stewart Highway.
Yeah.
There was an engine failure. And,
so it wasn't sealed in those days.
so that got a bit of coverage, I think, nationwide at the time. But so they flew in all sorts of conditions. And as you're indicating too there, Paul, that a lot of the pilots were people who'd flown in the war.
I think the story that you told me straight off the bat when we were chatting was that the very significant moment in the history of the Flying Doctor Service was when John Flynn passed away, and he was buried in Alice Springs. Of course, he was such a looming large figure in Australia, not just in the outback. And his funeral was going to be a really big event, and they brought a big boulder in from
Devil's Marbles, which is no longer there. A lot of controversy about that, and I think it's been replaced, and that boulder's gone back to Devil's Marbles.
I think the Aboriginal people actually replaced it themselves.
Yes, but I think there was a lack of consultation probably in the preliminary stages. But I don't think it was meant to be offensive. It just happened that way. But yes, it was a big deal, that service.
The Prime Minister was there, Robert Menzies.
Yes, and Fred Mackay, I think, would have been there, and was it Skipper Partridge? His name was conducting the service.
Yep. And your dad's part in this was?
He flew a plane at an appropriate time during the service, and he tells us, and it is obviously now chronicled in books, that he positioned his plane in a certain way that it cast a shadow over Mount Gillam in the shadow of a cross.
Now that was in the background of the service.
Exactly, and he dropped a wreath on Mount Gillam at that time. Now I do have a photo at home somewhere of a gentleman handing him the wreath before he got into the plane, but it has been recorded that my father used to sort of make it a bit of a joke that he made that cross, but it seems to have been remembered by people, and it had a certain symbolism to it.
Yeah. At the back of the service he flew. And I remember reading that when I was younger, and I thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. And now here I'm talking to the son of the pilot who pulled it off. It's quite amazing.
Yes.
In fact, I was telling the lady, I think after I talked to you, she came from Oodnadatta, and where John Flynn first flew from, the first service, and Fred Mackay that you mentioned told me that he called in the first Flying Doctor's plane to a boy who'd had an accident, crashed his head, and he called in, he put the wire up the tree and pedalled the wireless and brought the plane in. And he said, I still remember the doctor pushing that boy's brains back into his head and strapping it up, and then putting the boy in the plane and him taking off, and the same thing. The shadow of the plane went over them, and Fred Mackay, according to him, they said there's a couple of old bushies standing there watching this plane go over. One says to the other, you know what that is, don't you? He says, no, that's the Flying Christ, that is, So, it happened again, the cross thing, and those blokes weren't particularly religious, I don't think, but they saw it. But, so your dad, how long was your dad actually in Alice Springs?
He was there from 1950 until 1961. I had three other sisters, and the decision was made not to stay in Alice Springs because we'd all have to board. So he left Connellan Airways in 61, and he, I believe his pay halved when he joined the Department of Civil Aviation.
Really?
And I do recall when I was in Melbourne in 1965 or 6 that Eddie Connellan visited our house, and he was trying to entice my father back to Alice Springs to resume as manager, because they'd had some troubles with the subsequent managers. But
you think your dad sort of missed that?
No, look, by that stage he had moved on, and everything he did, he sort of seemed to see it as an an evolution. He was, I think he was a senior investigator of air accidents at that time, and he had also had another child, so there were 5 of us. So decision to go back would have been very difficult to do
understood.
that. Yeah, so he had a very successful career in the public service, but they were I mean, they're extraordinary people he met there.
And you said you still had his logbooks?
I have all these flying logbooks from when he first flew, and every flight he made with Connellan Airways and also with the DCA.
Wow. Well, that'd be a story in itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there, and you'll find little things that he did when he was in 1950. You'd look and see who the passenger was, and you'd see Susan M. Walters, and that was my mother. So he obviously took her up. He took his mother up for a flight as well, and they were flying tiger moths from Moorabbin Airport in Melbourne. And in fact, I remember he used to tell us a story about a woman called Olive Pink, who was a very feisty lady in Alice Springs, a remarkable woman, anthropologist, I think, by training. But Olive Pink took on bureaucracy everywhere, and she would complain that my father and his pilots were flying over her place and peering into her bedroom and bathroom.
There you go.
And the only way my father could prove it was not happening was by taking Olive Pink up in the plane and flying over a house and proving there's just no way they could.
No way in the world.
By that stage, Olive was 70, so I don't think there's a lot of interest in looking inside her bathroom anyway. But we heard this story about Olive Pink, and then I went back to Alice Springs for the first time with Mary and my boys some years ago, and we were standing in a native garden, and lo and behold, it was called the Olive Pink Botanic Gardens. Yeah. And she was a remarkable woman, Olive Pink, but she complained about everything. I once saw a letter where someone wrote, a senior bureaucrat wrote a letter to Canberra because Olive was worrying about where, I think, something was being positioned. I think they said there were three things you could do. You could either move the township, or you could move Mount Gillam, or someone suggested you could buy a bullet.
Move Olive.
Move Olive. But there were some extraordinary characters there.
Larger than life characters.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Peter. You've sort of taken us back. You know, okay, might be a little bit secondhand, but it's really nice sort of being able to get a glimpse of a world that's quite different to us now, and a world without mobile phones or any of those sort of things. And the sheer effort to put planes in the air, to provide radio, all that sort of thing was a fantastic effort, wasn't it? And your dad had a part in that. So, Peter, thank you. That's a great story.
My pleasure.